Let's start looking at the edit page. Now on the left and right sides and at the bottom are patch common controls. These are settings that are common for the whole part. We have mix sliders for layer A and B and other various settings here that control either one or both of the layers or the whole patch at the same time, but they remain constant. The center part here basically updates when we switch layers, so we get different settings for each of the layers. Now let's start with layer A. I have a very basic sound source loaded in. There's nothing on B, and we're going to start with the basics and look at how we can sculpt the sound with these sound source shaping parameters here. Now we have three different categories: main, FM, and multiplier. We can turn the power switch on for FM and multiplier with these switches, and you'll see the little green indicator lights come on underneath here, so we can turn them on and off with that as well, like that. Except for the main one. That has no power button, and as soon as we edit any of the controls, it automatically becomes enabled, and if I command click, it'll reset and disable, indicating that nothing is altered. So let's look at the settings here. For main, we have a timbre slider, and this shifts the tonal characteristics of the original samples, and it does it in an interesting way. It transposes the mapping of the samples in one direction and changes the pitch in the other. So basically, it just changes the tonal characteristics of the sample. Here's the sound as it is now. And as we shift the timbre, we'll hear the quality of the tone changing, and it only can be heard each time a new note is triggered. So if I sustain a note, we don't hear anything. It's only on new note ons. And this is interesting because it can create motion to the sound. This is interesting to modulate with one of the parameters. Now, the idea of modulation is that we want to change some of these parameters over time, and by subtly changing this over time, it can add variety to the sound. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take the arpeggiator and turn it on. Let's choose a pattern. It's a little bit busier. Let's try something like that. Oh, it's a little too straight. Let's try this one here. That should do it. So the arpeggiator's on, and I'm going to hit a note, and we'll hear it just repeating that note statically. And if I modulate the timbre slider, it'll add variety each new note on. So the thing is to automate that. So what I'm going to do is right-click on there, and I'm going to modulate it with, I'm going to choose an LFO. And due to the flex mod system in Trillion, what happens is that the next available LFO is assigned, and we can view the modulation routing over here. Now I know I'm jumping around a bit, but I want to show you this because it all sort of ties together. In this section, we can see what modulations exist with this drop-down menu, and there are already a couple that are default with a default initialized patch. So LFO1 is used already for pitch fine control. So since I chose to modulate that with an LFO, it chose LFO2. So now we see LFO2 as the source modulating sample timbre. So now when I play this note, we'll hear variety in the sound. We'll talk about modulation in more detail, but I just want to give you an idea. So you hear how modulating these parameters can really add variety. Now the start time basically controls where in the sample it's going to be triggered from. And this also can be modulated. Let me turn the arpeggiator off for the moment. And this is a good choice to demonstrate the sound because this has got a very distinctive sharp attack. Let me reset that for the moment. I'll command click there. And I'm going to turn off this modulation routing by muting it. So you see there, it's starting later in the sample and we're missing out that filtery sweep at the beginning. So now let's modulate that. I'm going to right click that and I'll choose modulate with LFO. And due to the flex mod system, it chooses LFO3. So let's put the arpeggiator back on and we'll hear the effect of that. And if we go back, we can put the other one on and we'll get some really nice variety to the sound. Here's the previous routing, and I'm going to unmute it, and we'll hear both of them modulated together. So all that motion created with a very basically static sound. Let's turn this off and go back, and I'm going to leave things as they are. And let's look at the FM parameters over here. Now we turn the power button on there, and basically FM stands for frequency modulation, and it's a form of synthesis where the timbre of one waveform, which is called the carrier, and that's this sound here, is changed by modulating it with the frequency of another waveform called the modulator. Now in Trillion, each layer has its own hidden FM oscillator that acts as the modulator, and we choose which waveform we want for that. Down here with these presets, we can choose between a sine wave, triangle wave, a sawtooth, or a random wave. Now there's a couple of controls. The key tracking button here disables or enables key tracking, which basically means that this modulating oscillator will track the pitch of the keyboard. So let's just hear what that sounds like with a regular waveform like that. And now with key tracking on, it's tracking the pitch of the keyboard. Whereas when it's off, it's remaining constant. Now, thing about modulating this frequency, what it does is it controls the frequency of the modulator signal, the signal down here, and when we get it on these notches, which correspond to values of 750, 500, or 250, they're harmonics that are related to the original pitch of the sound, so it's a little more consonant. If we get that right at 750, it's a little closer than in the middle, where it's really atonal sounding. And I'll use Shift to get fine control. There's 250. Now the depth controls the modulation depth. Now let's demonstrate what these do at really low values. You can really hear the different waveforms over here. I'm going to put this down and this all the way down. That's the sine wave shape. It's a real LFO type of sound. It's a triangle shape. And let's go to the sawtooth shape. You really hear it ramping up, or ramping down rather, and then just starting abruptly. And then the random one. So you can create some nice effects, and these can be modulated as well. Let's modulate this with another LFO, and we can use envelopes as modulation sources as well, but for now let's stick with this, and it'll choose LFO 4. So lots of nice, interesting ways to really color the sound. Let's move on to the voice multiplier. I'm going to turn this off, and let's reset this at the default values. And I'm going to command click, and it snaps to the default. And I'm going to mute our modulations as well. Let's go there and mute those. So we'll really have the very most basic incarnation of the sound. We're back to our original defaults. And I forgot to mention this. This just controls the slight fade in that we can have at the beginning of the start of the samples. There's no fade, a linear fade, or a curved kind of nonlinear fade. Now the voice multiplier has a harmonia function where we can add 2 more oscillators to double or triple the original sound source. And we can control here the level, panning, and tuning of them. So this is kind of a default. We get a kind of octave doubler thing here by default where it doubles it an octave higher. And you can control the mix here of how much of these additional oscillators you want in. And what this does is it detunes slightly the original one and leaves the octave one flat. So it's kind of a nice fat octave doubled sound. Here's another idea. We can put both of them at 0 and then just subtly detune them in each direction. And let's hard pan them. And now this way we'll get a nice fat detuned chorus kind of sound. And you can mix to taste. Or you can blend up these additional voices really high. So the idea basically is you set the interval here, and the rest is fairly self-explanatory. So there we can tune, let's say, in, that's a major second, minor third, major third, fourth, tritone, fifth. And let's command click here to reset these. And now we can have just a kind of open fifth sound. So all kinds of ways to fatten up and thicken and enhance your sound. So that's a little overview of the main sound source shaping parameters here. Let's end off with a little bit of fun and see what we created. I'm going to unmute our modulation routings for that and for that. And let's go back and bring these up a bit. We'll put our arpeggiator on. And there we go. See you for more in the next video.